Hello and welcome back to A Fall from Grace. We'll be continuing where we left off, which, if you recall, is after, I believe, it's when Cedric and Victor, and I believe Cedric is the coyote and Victor is the fox, who is also a thief. Um, I believe they were trying to rob a chubby bear, or was it lion? I forget what it was. They were trying to do like their first robbery together, but Cedric wouldn't really he wasn't really up to the task at that moment, so it didn't go right. So they ended up getting chased, I think, by some of the guards people, and apparently they were being led by Lysander, as we eventually find out. And Lysander ends up finding a little chess piece that I think Cedric gave to Victor. I don't remember really all that much from before because it's been a while. But yeah, Lysander is basically hot on the trail of, the I hesitate to call them a couple because they're not really a couple yet, but they are together. So yeah, he's hot on their trail basically, hunting them down because he is obsessed with Cedric. But yeah, I believe that's about it. I mean, they kind of came out to each other too while they were at the barn. So yeah, actually, yeah, that's about it, if I recall correctly. So, I believe that we will be visiting uh, Victor's old bandit group, the people that he used to hang out with when he was, I guess banditing more. So yeah, we're about to meet new characters and also find out what's up with Lysander. Anywho, so without further ado, let us continue A Fall from Grace. Also, this is supposed to be super long, or at least longer than the other ones, so either expect this to be 2 videos or one very long video. A crowd of people began to spill out of the old village church, flooding the surrounding graveyard as folks slowly headed to the wooden gate, quietly chattering on their way. The sound of the organ playing a traditional hymn from within the building's walls lent a sense of familiarity and almost stifling mundanity to the scene. It had taken place thousands of Sundays before, and would keep occurring thousands of Sundays after this one. The usual small groups of people formed, the same conversations were had, and what's more, the weather was sunny with a pleasant breeze, almost inviting the churchgoers to linger before leaving. Lysander gazed around as he slid his gloves on. The contempt he usually felt for most of these common paupers had been replaced by complete indifference. He had bigger things on his mind. A specific individual, to be precise, the coyote who had been tormenting every thought of his for what was beginning to seem like weeks on end. In fact, his obsession with Cedric had kept on growing each day. The lion would find himself thinking about him from the moment that he was awake to the moment that he'd lie his head on his pillow at night to get some rest. He now knew where Cedric was hiding, and it was only a matter of time before he and that wretched fox would be forced to leave the forest that they had decided to make their hideout and pass through the town nearby. The very thought of the amount of control that lion had over his former friend's life almost made him shiver with satisfaction. However, there was one pawn that he couldn't control, and that was his own parents. It was imperative that he should attend Mass with them each Sunday, and all attempts of getting them to visit the church in town that he was staying were in vain. They were animals of habit, and what's more, would never listen to anything that he said. In fact, to Lysander, his mother and father were almost complete strangers, relatives that he'd seen during the weekend, and perhaps for the occasional game of croquet, if they were feeling particularly sociable. Being the only son, as well as the heir to the largest and wealthiest estate and family fortune in the country, didn't seem to make him special in the slightest in their eyes. His father was a bitter and disillusioned man, and couldn't care less about how the young lion spent his fortune. As for his mother, he was quite sure that there must have been some kind of mistake the day that he was born. Surely the mother that he was meant for was a warm and kind and loving lady. The older woman that he visited each Sunday shared none of those attributes. Rather, he had a hunch that she'd probably never want to bear a child in the first place. Not everyone is fit for parenting after all. But these were all minor issues to him. The one thing that mattered, that he was profoundly grateful for, was the fact that he had been born into upper-class society. His mother had taught him it was a sign that his thoughts and views mattered more than most other people's, as he was the descendant of a noble lineage that was said to have once been related to royalty in the distant Middle Ages. This was a philosophy that had always kept him going even during the darkest times. His parents had squandered their opportunity, but he had a right to do as he pleased and change the world around him. His sword had been chosen to guide the rough and unruly masses that were the lower classes. Indeed, worthy people like him rightfully ruled the country. But there was one other aspect of himself Lysander couldn't seem to control, and had been fighting ever since that fateful day when Cedric had left. A feeling that had been gnawing at the back of his mind persistently. What he had come to realize was his own attraction to men. He had been brought up to believe that the very thought was not even an option, and that if it was actually existing, was disgusting and sinful, a vice most likely imported from the lustful, unmanly countries such as France or Italy. But how could this be true? Surely there was a reason he felt this way. He wasn't a common tail raiser, and the fact both he and Cedric were so inclined could not be a coincidence. He'd come to realize that it was a sign that they were meant for each other, and the fact that the coyote had been blinded by infatuation for a low-life fox was the main obstacle Lysander needed to overcome if he wanted to achieve his rightful goal. The sound of the organ began to grow distant, eventually fading away as he slid past the gate and down the oft-trod path, reaching his mother and father, who were already sitting in their carriage and quietly muttering to themselves. Lysander turned to the coachman as he boarded the vehicle. "Head southeast and drop me off in Hidingstone, Monty. Then take my parents home." He sat down as the carriage began moving, pulling the silk curtain to avoid the strong sunlight shining through the foliage above. There were many wide trees on each side of the road that they were taking. "Where did you say that you were heading, Lysander?" "You heard me, matter. Do not pretend otherwise." His father growled. "What the hell are you staying in Hidingstone for, boy?" "I think that is very much my own business." The old line continued in a sarcastic tone. "I thought you said you hated these towns." Lysander turned to his mother, who had picked up a small book in the meantime. "And since when have you or the Pater ever been interested in what I'm doing?" "Do not talk nonsense. You know we care about you." The lion grumbled and crossed his arms as he sat back, making himself comfortable. "That would be a change." "I heard talk of a group of bandits lodging near that town from Lady Bisley." Upon hearing this, Lysander was unable to contain a naughty grin. "I am well aware. I'm not paying if they take you hostage, so stay out of trouble." The smile faded from Lysander's face. "I see it is only a matter of time before I get my post-Sunday lecture each week, isn't it?" "Don't say that, Lysander. You know that we are uncommonly lenient with you." "How about you get back to that book of yours, matter? Another such remark to your mother and you're walking to Hidingstone, boy." "What about your friend? What is he up to? I haven't seen him in a while." The young lion's eyes widened, as he obviously wasn't expecting this question. "Cedric? Oh, he is doing well." He paused briefly as he gathered his thoughts. "I'll be seeing him again soon, I expect." "I'm glad to hear so. You could learn such manners from him." "Ah, yes. You like that little soft-spoken Nancy boy, don't you?" Lysander felt his hands turn to fists. "I'd rephrase that if I were you." "Keep calm, boy. I meant no harm. I rather like him myself." And with that, the old lion turned his attention to his wife as they began murmuring about mundane plans and useless gossip. This persisted for the remainder of the journey as Lysander kept quiet. He gazed out the window at the trees passing by, recalling the few times that he and Cedric had gone picnicking in the woods. They needed to do so again soon, the moment the coyote was home again. He scowled as he shoved some dirtier thoughts and eventually followed this one to the back of his mind. He only spoke again to say goodbye to his parents once their carriage had reached Hiding Stone. Then, picking up the small bag that he used for traveling, he ploddingly strolled down the main street, saluting the guards he passed along the way. It was barely twilight when Victor finally came to a halt in front of a wide oak tree. Cedric caught up a few seconds later, his legs beginning to ache after the sheer amount of walking and running earlier that day. The forest was almost eerily silent all around, except for the pleasant breeze which was steadily growing stronger now that the sun had disappeared beyond the horizon. The coyote examined the surroundings and warily spoke up after catching his breath. What's the matter, V? Why have we stopped here? Victor turned to look at his friend and smiled gently. I think luck is on our side, Cedric. I found what we're looking for. Cedric noticed him confidently turn back to face the broad oak tree towering in front of him. This is the largest tree in the forest. I'm sure that I once heard that the residents of the town nearby affectionately refer to it as Hearn's Oak. You know, from Shakespeare's Twelfth Night? Cedric smiled at this unexpected literacy reference from Victor. I didn't know that you were familiar with Shakespeare, V. He chuckled. Though you might be mistaking Twelfth Night for the Merry Wives of Windsor. The fox waved a hand playfully. Ah, that's what it was. Can't say that I'm too familiar with them, to be honest. But I know someone who is. Victor took off his right glove, bringing his hand to his lips. This was soon followed by a loud and carefully timed three-note whistle. Cedric almost jumped, not expecting this in the slightest, but he quickly realized what was happening. They must have finally reached the bandit camp the fox had excitedly told him about a few hours earlier. The two looked around, waiting to see if Victor's call had worked or if they had stumbled their way into yet another dead end. The seconds seemed to pass at an agonizingly slow pace as the forest around them grew even quieter. Victor turned to face his friend once more, displaying an increasingly fatigued and defeated expression. It would appear that I was wrong after all. Suddenly, a loud rustling of leaves nearby caught his ears. Then, within seconds, a group of figures emerged from the bushes around them. It happened so quickly the coyote didn't even have time to register exactly how many people made up this group. One of them rapidly lit a torch, whose sudden light was almost blinding to Cedric's eyes, now having grown accustomed to their dark surroundings. Well, well, well. Look who we have here. As the coyote finally began to get a good view of these unfamiliar shapes, he noticed the animal holding the torch was a tall and notably muscular hyena. He was extremely imposing, his sole appearance commanding everyone's attention. The clothes this hyena was wearing were also immediately noticeable. A pair of cream-colored breeches and white stockings covered his legs, his shoes black with shiny silver buckles and bright red heels. However, the most unusual item by far was a purple robe that he was carrying over his left shoulder that flowed down and tied around his waist, clearly resembling a Roman toga. Above it was a red bandana matching the color of his heels. To complete the look, the hyena was wearing a floral crown made up of various leaves, flowers, and petals, mirroring his poetic Apollonian appearance. Victor smiled confidently. It's good to see you too, Dion. The hyena replied in a low but almost growling tone. I can't believe you of all people would show your ugly face again. The fox almost took a step back at this remark. He then gave a worried reply. Look, I'm sure that we can be reasonable about this. Cedric's heart began to beat faster. Was Victor in trouble? Hadn't he said that he and the other bandits were firm friends? Without warning, the hyena and Victor burst out laughing as they fondly embraced. The other two, whose faces Cedric could now discern more clearly, also couldn't help but smile at the scene. It's wonderful to see you again, you fool. Welcome back, Vic. These are all supposed to have, like, British accents. In fact, later on, they're actually going to say, like, oh, he has a Northern British, he has a Southern British. Well, they don't say British, but they do say Northern Southern. But I can't do those accents without sounding stupid, so you get what you get, okay? What a lovely surprise. Cedric sighed, relieved that this was just a joke and that his friends had been playing along. The fox turned to face the other bandits once he'd caught his breath again. As he did so, so did Cedric, curiously gazing at these two other animals. The one closest to where he was standing was a Doberman, lean but in good shape, with dark and silky short fur. He was wearing what looked like a soldier's uniform. Though it was unlike those of the soldiers Cedric and Victor had been forced to hide from during the past few days, the coyote thought to himself. He concluded that this must have been much older, dating from at least 50 years earlier. What made this even stranger was the fact that the Doberman himself only seemed to be in his late 20s. Cedric thus assumed that there must have been quite a tale behind this particular item of clothing. The other bandit standing a few steps away from the dog was a handsome sun bear. The coyote realized he'd never actually met someone of this particular species, so he observed them with a naive curiosity. The clothes this bear was wearing were rather worn out, yet very elegantly combined. Alongside them, he brandished a rifle and a rapier, paired off with some polished hunting boots. These bandits certainly cared about their appearance, the coyote thought to himself. How have you been, lads? Where are the others? Dion interrupted Victor, speaking in a much lighter tone than earlier. Cedric noticed the hyena had a rather elegant upper-class accent, as well as a precise theatrical way of enunciating his words. We should be asking the questions here, you rascal. Let's save casual conversations for later. What are you doing here, my boy? Are you in need of any assistance? Then he quickly turned to face Cedric properly for the first time, eyes widening with intrigue. I see you've begun to associate yourself with a different sort of crowd. Who might this dashing gentleman be? This is my childhood friend Cedric. We've essentially been on the run for the last couple of days. It's a long and fascinating story, but I'd rather be narrating our misadventures around a warm fire and accompanied by something to eat, if that's not much to ask. Of course, my good fellow. Follow me, I'll lead you both to the camp. Hollis will treat you to a hearty dinner. He turned and firmly shook Cedric's hand. And it is a pleasure to meet you, Cedric. The coyote gave a short and awkward reply. Likewise, sir. I already like the lad. He turned and gave Victor a knowing look, as if he were privy to something that Cedric wasn't, before turning the attention back to the coyote. My name's Dion, short for Dionysus. Victor giggled. Stage name, more like? Dion turned to face him with the blankest expression that he could muster. What would you rather be calling me? I absolutely despise my birth name. I'd rather be dragged through the city streets tied to a cart than have that used against me. The hyena began walking, holding the torch above his head as the others followed suit. Victor rested his hands on the older bandit's shoulders. I'm just fooling around, Dion. You forget who's providing the food this evening, and such insults to the group's leader will not be taken lightly. I see your theatrical outbursts haven't changed all since our last meeting. As the group made their way through the muddy ground and thick undergrowth, Cedric felt a few branches pinch and scratch the sides of his legs. He needed a change of wardrobe once they got to his camp. Both his current suit and breeches weren't going to hold up much longer. When was our last meeting? It seems so long ago. The Doberman spoke up from behind them with a slightly northern accent. We last saw Vic a year ago, at least. Must have been after mugging that old posh wanker. Which one? Those are all that we rob. The one with the scowl and mug that even a mother would have trouble loving. Still yet to ring a bell. The Sun Bear chimed in, hoping to clarify his friend's words. I believe that they were the one that was embezzling from the orphanage. Oh, Sanderson. That would make sense. Aye, Blake's right. After that, you all decided to move and set up camp elsewhere, but I still didn't feel ready to leave my home country yet. I assume that's not the case anymore? Again, it's a long story. I'll explain everything once we get to the... Here we are. The group came to a halt, having now reached a clearing in the forest. Cedric could see a lit campfire a few feet away, surrounded by some white tents, standing beside an aging carriage, which the bandits were seemingly using to store food and drinks, judging by the shine of the bottles that he could discern on the inside. The hyena lifted his right hand to his mouth and bellowed. "We have returned, boys! Come, feast your eyes upon who we found near Heron's Oak!" A couple of figures emerged from behind one of the tents as a coyote heard one of them reply excitedly. "Is that Victor?" This bandit rushed towards them and warmly embraced the fox. Victor laughed cheerfully. "Hollis, my favorite feline. What a pleasure to see you again." The bandit in question was a tall and broad tiger, whose height was only surpassed by Dion's. He was wearing what looked like an old dark red overcoat, along with a leather belt with a small dagger tied to one side. At first sight, he seemed the friendliest of all the bandits, greeting Victor with a warm and welcoming tone. As the tiger let go, he turned to face the coyote, much like Dion had done earlier. "And who's this fellow that you brought with you?" Victor cleared his throat now that all the bandits were positioned in a circle surrounding the two friends. "I think some introductions are at hand. Lads, this is my best friend Cedric, a charming and kind soul, as well as a terrifically talented artist." The coyote rolled his eyes at that last remark. "Oh please, V, not this again." The others all greeted him merrily. "Cedric, you already met Dion, the leader of this parcel of rogues." Then the fox took a step towards the bandit standing to his left. "This handsome devil is Hollis, their very own bartender." The tiger held out his arm and gently shook Cedric's hand, speaking in a sweet southwestern accent. "Pleasure. It's very exciting to meet a friend of Victor's." "Pleasure is all mine." The coyote smiled shyly as he attempted to make conversation. "I don't think that I've ever heard of a tiger bartender before." Hollis cheerfully replied. "No? Why, my whole family are bartenders, as well as many others that I've met. I assure you we're no rarity." "And along with him, I should also introduce you to his faithful carriage." "Aye, she's a sturdy one. I've been using her to store our food and drink supplies for donkey's years." "Speaking of which, let me go and cook something for you both. I assume you're hungry." "To be completely honest, I would kill for some food right now." "I'd kill for much less." The others chuckled, but Victor swiftly answered the Doberman. "Easy now, no need to scare Cedric already." The fox faced his friend once again. "This moody fellow is Blake. He puts up a stern facade, but you'll learn to love him. And I do enjoy scaring the newcomers. This is true." Before Victor could elaborate further, the sun bear Cedric had been curiously eyeing on his way to the camp walked up to him and shook his hand. "Hello, Cedric. I'm Ridley, and those are some very stylish clothes you're wearing." The coyote smiled awkwardly as he hadn't been expecting this comment. He brushed some dirt off of his suit as he replied. "Oh, thank you. They're not in great shape, as you can see." "I can help you with that. I take care of mending everyone's garments here. Just let me know if you need anything, and I'll gladly assist you." Victor playfully crossed his arms. "I see Ridley hasn't bothered to wait for an introduction." "Frankly, Vic, I've heard enough people tell me who I am to last me a lifetime. I'd rather introduce myself." "Of course, I understand." "And don't forget that there's one more of us that you need to introduce." "Why, yes. How could I?" Victor walked up to a short and chubby house-cat, dressed in an elegant formal clothing and wearing an old powdered wig. Cedric was very surprised. This was the least bandit-looking person out of the whole bunch. At least, he couldn't have seemed out of place behind a marble counter in a city bank. "This is Selwyn, one of the toughest criminals I've met." The cat grew red in the face, replying with a deep voice. "Oh, hush, Victor. Enough of your bullying." "I was serious." As the fox turned to face his friend, Dion chimed in on the conversation again. "You see, our Selwyn used to be an accountant, Then one day he realized his life was going absolutely nowhere. So he decided to embark on a grand adventure. He stole all the company's finances, leaving his old life forever and joining our merry gang. This hits close to home, as Cedric realized his life story sounded incredibly similar to Selwyn's on a surface level. He wondered what fate might have befallen him had he not decided to leave his hometown. That makes me sound much too interesting. Prepare to be disappointed, Cedric. I forgot to mention that he's usually all doom and gloom. Dion and the others, including the cat, all laughed at this remark. I won't dispute that. A short time later, the group were all sitting around the campfire eating the delicious beef Hollis had cooked for them. The tiger jokingly scolded Selwyn as he served the cat his portion. I prepared this for Vic and Cedric, Sel, and that means no extras. All right, I didn't say that I wanted any. I can read your body language, you rogue. Cedric tasted his meal, resisting the urge to gobble it down rapidly. Regardless of how hungry he was, he needed to enjoy his food properly. He smiled as he recalled that was some advice Lysander's Aunt Jane always used to give before the meal times. The old lady might have been a bit of a nutter, but a broken clock is still right twice a day. The coyote was very impressed at how tasty the meat was, and how well the sauce accompanied it. Hollis must have served some wonderful meals in the tavern he used to work in, he thought. This is really good. Thank you, Cedric. I'm afraid that it's not perfect. I wanted to get it done as quickly as I could, because I knew you boys were ravenous. No need to excuse yourself. It's fantastic. I'm glad to hear the meal is appreciated. However, I'd be very curious to learn more about our two guests this evening, our young coyote friend in particular, whom we have heard so much about over the years, might I add. The last statement came as a big surprise to Cedric, though the more he thought about it, it made sense that Victor had spoken about him to the bandits previously. It was rather touching to think of, as well as proof that the fox had kept thinking about his childhood friend over the years. He then began to tell the full story of how he and Cedric first became friends, following it with a shortened list of all the events that had befallen the two since. Cedric occasionally intervened to add what he deemed to be some relevant details or a splash of color to the tale as the others listened intently. Once Victor had finished, it was a brief moment of silence as the bandits took in all that they've just heard. Curiously, Blake was the first to speak up, giving a little snort. Most animals of your social class wouldn't last an hour in the wild, let alone 2 days. That was meant to be a compliment, Cedric. Well, Blake is right. I'm lucky that I had Victor by my side. I wouldn't have been able to do any of this without him. I'm glad that you decided to set off on this journey with me, my dear. Victor put his hand around the coyote's back, affectionately pulling him in his direction. The one side effect is you have Lord Dickface as your enemy, and he's forcing his cronies to search everywhere for you. That is a rather large sack of shit to be dealing with. You're right. But if we had worse, as you know, it's inevitable that our lifestyle should lead to a fair amount of risk-taking. I think you've been very brave, both of you. Selwyn said this out loud, but was too embarrassed to make proper eye contact with either of the two. Dion softly chimed in. Indeed, it is a fascinating story. And might I ask what's going to happen in the next chapter? What are your plans for the foreseeable future? Good question. I honestly wish that we could give you a half-decent answer. If that's to be the case, might I make a suggestion? The hyena touched his own chin, crossing his fingers just below his mouth. We're all ears. Stay with us for a few days, even a few weeks if it suits you. I know you both set off with your own plans, but as in all good stories, life has found its way of subverting them. Once you're both gathered enough money and feel ready, then you could finally travel eastward, reach the largest towns and start things over by seeking employment, like you were originally hoping to. The fox nodded and turned to his friend. Well, what do you think, Cedric? I agree. That sounds like the best plan that we could follow right now. Dion stood up and walked over to where the coyote was seated. holding out his right hand. "For the time being, we're happy to have you as our guest, my boy." As Cedric shook his hand, suddenly the hyena burst out laughing. "Why, we haven't even told him the name of our group." He quickly regained his composure, clearing his throat dramatically. "Cedric, it is with great pride that I introduce you to the Masquerade. My brilliant idea, of course, a sort of tribute to the stage." Victor interrupted Dion before the hyena could get too carried away with his explanation. "Basically, each one of us has their own mask. It's part of the gimmick, as well as another reason why I decided to buy mine." Cedric couldn't help but smile at this information. How very theatrical. "But of course, I am a former actor myself." As Cedric will have noticed, no doubt. The coyote joined in laughing with the others. That would explain a lot, and it would certainly explain Heron's Oak. "Indeed, I imagine someone of your status would be well versed in literary works, my boy. Now please make yourself at home. We'll set up your sleeping headquarters, and there is a stream over to the left just beyond those trees if you need a wash. Thank you for your wonderful hospitality. It is much appreciated." The hyena turned his attention to Victor, whom he noticed was getting up from the log that he'd been seated on during the meal. "Perhaps you and I could have a word later about a few important matters, Victor?" "Of course, Tian. There are a few things that I need to ask you too." At this point, the group split up as each member went their own way, some going back to their tents, others still lingering near the glowing embers of the campfire. Cedric thought that it'd be healthy to have a moment to himself, and after informing Victor, he walked off towards the stream the hyena had pointed out earlier. After getting close to the watercourse, he slowly sat down, letting its sweet and calming sound soothe his ears. He took off his boots and socks, tossing them on the surrounding grass and dipping his toes in the cool water. All the events that had happened that day seemed to flicker before his eyes as he peacefully closed his eyes. It was almost surreal to think that barely a few hours ago he and Victor were still lodging in the barn at Agnes and Harold's farmstead. They'd been through so much in barely a day. Once more, the coyote couldn't help but feel all this was meant to unfold, though perhaps it wasn't a question of fate after all. It might have been the fact that, as of late, Cedric felt his existence had some kind of renewed purpose. A reason why he was risking everything. The chance for a happy life. He'd fight all the guards and Lysander in the world for it. Now, feeling like his mind was finally rested, he stood up, ready to walk back to the camp. Perhaps he could have a chat with some of the other bandits to get to know them better. If he and Victor were to follow Dion's suggestion, they would be lodging at their headquarters for a while. They'd certainly made a good first impression. The coyote felt a sense of ease while talking to them during the meal, the initial awkwardness at their unfamiliarity having only lasted a couple of minutes. They barely knew him and were already treating him as an old friend, which was more than he could say about Lysander's best mates Jack and Bill on their first evening that they'd met. But then again, the two of them being utterly drunk in a shady gambling house on said night might have had something to do with their behavior. Cedric must have been a lot more patient than he gave himself credit for, judging by how long he'd put up with it. Worst of all, they seemed to enjoy encouraging Lysander's nastiest traits. No, focusing on Jack and Bill wouldn't do his mood any good. He tried to dwell on happier memories as he picked up his pace, reaching the camp in a matter of seconds, dead set on chatting to a couple of bandits. Now, who should I talk to first? Let's talk to the hyena. Gazing around the camp, Cedric was having trouble spotting their eccentric leader amongst them, which should have been an easy feat. A man of that size and stature in such flashy clothing was clearly not trying to hide. As Cedric walked the perimeter, a familiar voice resounded from somewhere in the trees nearby. Following it, it did not take long for him to spot the hyena standing in a small clearing with something clutched in his hand. Rather than approaching and interrupting the imposing figure, the coyote stopped nearby to listen to the actor. "Hark, young chosen, Turn thine eyes and ears to mine, and seek the answers thou hast throughout the Sisyphean quest. Thou shouldst have fallen long ago with thine companions, but thou hast proven trickier and more cunning than the average hero. And now everything thou hast set thy gaze on has led thee to me. Know thine place and kneel before the god who will end thee. Dion paused in his monologue as though he were waiting for a response from a non-existent figure. For whether or not thou shalt bow to me, the gods have already determined thine fate. Long ago was it intertwined with mine, but no longer. Thy thread is already pulled, taunt. It only waits to be severed by my blade. On God, for the mercy thou seeks hath run it dry like the Styx. Cedric waited a moment, intently listening to the rehearsed speech, when Dion lowered his arm and bowed. And scene. You may come out now, lad. The coyotes startled for a moment after realizing his presence was known, before applauding and entering the clearing where the leader waited. That was quite the show, Dion. But how'd you know that I was there? I was sure that I'd been silent. If an actor doesn't know his stage, if he is not aware of the surroundings, then he is nothing more than a clumsy fool. He paused, reveling in the dramatics. You also stepped on a twig. Ah, well, maybe I'm not as sneaky as I thought. It's all right, lad. You'll improve the longer that you're with us. The life of a bandit is not an easy one after all. Besides that fact, what brings you my way? Is there anything that I can help you with? Only that I'd like to get to know you better. If I'll be here for a while, I should make myself comfortable in all senses. Dion wore a huge smile on his face when hearing the words. Why, of course! What do you want to know? I have plenty of stories to tell and various ways to tell them. Like that one from earlier? Indeed. Who authored that, by the way? I don't recognize it. That is a Dionysus original, my boy, penned finely by yours truly in an effort to live amongst the greats. How did you enjoy it? Well, it was quite dramatic and over the top. I'd expect nothing less from an actor like you. Excellent. Establishing a way to stand out amongst one's fellow artists is hard, but a notable feat. Hearing that I've begun to accomplish that brings joy to my heart. Cedric smiled, knowing that they were getting off topic, but entertained the hyena nevertheless. How long have you been working on that one? It is amongst one of my more recent pieces. I call it Andrea Shall Fall. It follows the story of a man hated by the gods and assigned various quests to accomplish meant to kill him. Unfortunately for the gods, however, he surpasses each challenge, no matter how impossible, seeking to mark his name amongst the greats. The god leading the charge in particular was prophesied to be killed by said hero, and by the end of the story, the two engage in a final combat upon Olympus. Cedric couldn't help but find himself intrigued by the story. It sounded like any book that he would have found amongst the shelves of his former home. It sounds incredible. Will you ever perform it for us? The hyena let out a loud, boisterous laugh before slapping a hand down on Cedric's shoulder. Maybe one day, my boy. I still have yet to finish the tale, but I am, oh so close. He paused, eyeing the coyote up and down. Perhaps you could help me? You seem well versed in the ways of plays and literature such as this, and I am not ashamed to seek the assistance of an editor. Cedric smiled back. I'd love to. Excellent. You continue to impress me, my boy. A warm feeling filled Cedric's chest at that, enjoying the praise. Have you always been interested in writing stories like this? Aye, though I did not garner the support of those close to me, unfortunately. Growing up, I lived in a less than financially stable family. Times were tough, and the day that I saw a play made them only tougher. Laying my eyes on that stage felt like a call to my destiny that I could not refuse. I taught myself how to read and write, telling my parents that it would help us in the long run. When they found out the little funds that they spared me were being directed towards playwriting, however, they were disgusted. They called it the devil's work and told me that I was disappointing them, and God, In my blasphemous ways, throwing my writings into the fire, I fled that house that week. Oh, I'm sorry for asking, Dion. I didn't mean to bring up such a touchy subject. Worry not, my boy. Every good tale has its tragedies. They're what makes our life stories more interesting. Cedric felt like he might be pushing his luck, but Dion was truly a great storyteller. He wanted to know more. Then what happened next? Upon my flight, I managed to find a new home amongst a traveling theater company. It was as if the fates had heard my pleas. It was a small group, but they welcomed me with open arms. I spent quite a number of years with them, learning as much as I could. All of us had the dream of having our names amongst the greats, hoping our stories would be passed along for generations. As a result of the emotions from departing my family and the ones that I kept bottled up from hiding my fascination for men, I poured a great deal of it into my writings. They were good pieces, that I might add, surely ones that would have garnered our troops some attention. If I only wasn't too ashamed to show them, my plays could be out there. Dion was smiling at the fond memories as he recalled them. That sounds wonderful. You must have truly loved every moment. I did. His smile began to fade. But the gods had other plans for me in that regard. A traveling theater troupe can only do so well for so long before disaster strikes. Egos began to clash with each other, and the subsequent funds added to the negative passion. The group began to crack beneath the pressure. Then one day it shattered. It was like the blink of an eye where we disbanded, where I once again was penniless and without a home. Town to town I went in search of a job, turning up nearly a shilling. There was no work for an actor with a minor reputation like mine to find. Thus we find ourselves at my current fate. I turned to banditry when I was clear that there was no other options left for me. A few months after I met Hollis, and together we donned the name of my former troupe in search of forging a more sound family than either I had before. Cedric was silent, the story playing in his head again, yet another person who had turned to banditry out of desperation. And look at us now, together and reunited with Vic, happier than we have ever been. Cedric's guilt began to grow again, feeling as though he was out of place amongst these people. If he had gotten himself together, he could have gone back to his family. None of these people were at fault for becoming bandits. Circumstances had pushed them to their point. Did he had chosen his life when he had an opportunity to live one they had likely dreamt about. His mind flashed to his mistakes earlier that day, reminded how he had messed up his first proper robbery. Did he really belong here? As Cedric began to shy, Dion watched his face fall and recognized the look that he had seen on so many of his compatriots before. The hyena smiled, sitting on a nearby log and gesturing for the coyote to do the same. Something on your mind? Cedric hesitated, contemplating whether he should elaborate on his failure earlier to the man who was most likely the best bandit here. If he wanted to make a good impression, wasn't it better to make him think that Cedric was capable? Yet the coyote found himself sitting down all the same. Victor seemed to have a history with this man, and there was no sense of lying about it to someone who had been incredibly hospitable. V and I attempted a robbery before you found us, before guards showed up, as we relayed earlier. The detail V spared, however, was that I hesitated. I thought that I had the courage to go through with it, the guts to commit. But when I came face to face with the reality of it all, it was as though a wave crashed down on my willpower and I froze. Cedric looked down in his hands, not meeting Dion's eyes. What if I hesitate again? What if I get someone hurt or worse? I wouldn't be able to handle that. When it all comes down to it, I'm scared that I don't have what it takes like the rest of you do. There were tears in Cedric's eyes as he let out a shaky breath, surprised how quickly it all had come out spilling to him. He needed this more than he realized. A large hand clapped down on his back, nearly sending the coyote sprawling to the ground. When he looked at Dion, he saw that he was wearing a smile. That, my boy, proves that you do. Seeing the confused look Cedric gave him, the hyena continued. Do you think any of us started out our lives thinking that this is where fate would draw us? living a life of crime and constantly on the run from the law? Life never has plans that we expect them to have for us, and that's what makes it all the more worth living. To answer your question, no matter what we do, every job has its risks, and we all accept that fact every time we take one on. Even now, there is moments of hesitation and questions amongst all of us. We're all given up our fair share of dreams and achievements to walk this path. But having the ability to question it all proves that you have a good head on your shoulders. Not only that, but a good heart as well. He placed a hand on Cedric's chest. And to follow your heart like you did takes the most courage of all. Cedric wiped the tears from his eyes and turned, enveloping the hyena in a big hug, which he returned. After a few moments, the hyena stood up and offered Cedric a hand. "Here, follow me." The two walked back towards the camp and stood on the edge, looking around at the various bandits strewn about. Laid out before you was a group that is perceived by the masses to be nothing but no-good dirty criminals. Many of the rich would love to mount our heads. But those that truly look at us can see that we're more than just those that society despises. We're outriders and outcasts, misfits and marauders, unique and unruly, yet at our core, this group surpasses all of that. We're family, Cedric, and we're all more than happy to have you join us. I wonder who I should talk to next. Hollis is a tiger and Ridley is, the sun bear, right? Cedric set his eyes on Hollis' old carriage, its warm red tone almost glowing in the flickering firelight. Where on earth could the tiger have found or bought such an item, he wondered. Hollis appeared almost on cue, heading for the wooden door with a pile of plates the group had used during their meal in his arms. Cedric waved as he saw the tiger glance in his direction, the bandit smiling in return. "Ahoy there, Cedric. Is there anything you need?" No, don't worry. I was just wondering if you had a moment to chat." "I'm just done cleaning your plates, so your timing couldn't be better, actually." "That's great. Well, I was just wondering how you came to own this carriage." Cedric almost kicked himself as he realized how foolish he must have sounded. This was a bandit, for heaven's sake. What was the most likely way the tiger had gotten his hands on it? "Did you, steal it?" Hollis laughed as he walked up the steps and entered the vehicle to rid himself of the clean dishes. "Indeed I did, lad. Probably the cleanest robbery of my life. This beauty had already been stolen by a couple of rogues, but the moment that I saw her I knew that she had to be mine. Funnily enough, I'd never thought my old profession would come in handy as a bandit, yet that's exactly what happened. I mixed up an incredibly powerful drink that evening. It would have knocked the world's strongest bull over in a matter of seconds. I'm telling ya. Then I snuck into their camp as they were dining and slipped a good amount into each of their bottles and flasks. Barely an hour later, they were spread out on the ground, utterly unconscious. And so I tied a horse to my new carriage and rode away, victorious in the end." Hollis reached Cedric as he sat down on one of the logs with a loud groan. He grumbled as he stretched his legs. "Honestly, at times it feels like I do all the housework for these boys and get nothing in return." Cedric smiled. "Ask for a larger share of the loot, perhaps?" "Aye, or just a favor or two. I do well to keep that in mind." "But tell me something about yourself, Cedric. I am very curious to get to know you. It's not often our lot crosses paths with a proper nobleman." The coyote let out an embarrassed snort, setting himself close to the tiger. "I might have been a nobleman when I was little, but that life is dead and buried by now. Moreover, I never spoke to a bandit until I met V again. Dining with all of you has been incredibly eye-opening in experience. Be careful not to let this excessively cloud your judgment. Our life is not all sunshine and roses, and most of us are not good people, to tell the truth. By my words, I've met my fair share of scoundrels from all walks of life." The voice of another bandit calling Hollis' name suddenly caught their attention as the two turned to witness a familiar sun bear heading their way. "Might I ask you for a little something to drink? Some gin or brandy, whatever you have stored?" "This better be a special occasion, Rid. Well now, I didn't know that specifying my motivation was essential to getting served. Hollis flung his hands in the air defensively as he replied. I'm sorry, I'm just a tad ratty this evening. I'll see what I can get you. The tiger got up and opened the wooden carriage door once more. Cedric could have sworn its creak was getting louder each time he heard it. Ridley sat himself next to Cedric as he adjusted one of his shiny belts. Besides, another special occasion is the fact that Cedric's here with us, isn't it, Ced? The coyote chuckled. It hadn't taken the bear much time at all to give him a nickname. I was just telling Hollis that I'd love to get to know all of you better. You've been very welcoming and friendly. Ridley stopped fiddling with the buckles and whipped his chest with an air of confidence. I do my best. Here you go, cocky. Hollis handed the bear an old mug, which the bandit accepted without hesitation. Ah, there's nothing quite like the delicious liquor of the gods. Ridley eyed the coyote inquisitively as he sipped his drink. Where did you buy this suit, I wonder? Might have been Mr. Weasley's shop back in your hometown? Cedric's eyes widened at the mention of a familiar name. Oh, yes, it was actually. I often went there to buy clothes with Lysander and his aunt. I know the man well enough. Used to visit his shop when I was close by. I was a tailor's apprentice years ago. Hollis glanced over at Cedric with a playful smirk. Now you understand why Ridley takes care of everyone's clothes. The devil is always overdressed. For heaven's sake, it must be nearing 11 o'clock. Do you really need to wear that hat? The hat stays on, Hollis. To be honest, I am very jealous of Ridley's look. A short pause followed as the bear drank from his mug. It is not a personal question. Are you and Victor a couple? It took a few seconds for Cedric to realize what he'd just been asked. A sensation of panic rapidly took over following the initial bewilderment. What was he supposed to say? He didn't even know what these bandits thought about same-sex relationships. Was it safe to open up to them? Besides, he and Victor weren't a couple. Yet. Well... God, had the others all assumed? If it's not a personal question? I'm curious as all. Victor suddenly shows up with a handsome lad who used to be his childhood best friend. Don't tell me that you weren't thinking the same. Cedric, I think it's a good time to mention that most of us are either attracted to men or men and women in case Vic hadn't told you. So we're not going to judge it regardless. The coyote was very surprised to hear so, not to mention relieved. Thinking about it, having spent most time in a safe and understanding environment would certainly explain Victor's positive attitude towards these topics. However, he still didn't quite know what to say and hadn't managed to answer either of the two. It's one of the aspects that ties us together as a group. We all share similar experiences. I see. Well, yes. I mean, no. They all laughed as Cedric tried to word his thoughts properly. Yes, I prefer the company of men. But no, we're not in a relationship. We do rather fancy each other, though. The coyote began to grow red in the face after that statement. Young love. Easy now, old man. Hollis lazily got up and stretched his arms. This old man has one last task to do this evening. It's been lovely chatting. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go set up a tent for you, Cedric. A bandit's work is never done, Hollis walked away and was quickly swallowed by the darkness surrounding the campfire as Cedric and Ridley sat together for a bit longer. There aren't enough Hollies in this world. As the bear took another sip of his drink, the coyote spoke with a more serious, pensive tone. Ridley, can I tell you something? Anything you like. You don't know how good it feels to know that I can be completely open about myself here. Having to constantly hide a part of who I am is so exhausting, and it often feels like most people just don't get me anyway. But with you fellows, that thin veil is gone. I can just sit back, speak my mind, and forget about everything. Cedric felt Ridley's soft, gloved hand touch his own. Actually, I do know how it feels, Ced. I'm sure I've had to hide more about myself than anyone else here. What do you mean? The bear crossed his legs and cleared his voice. Try to picture this. Suppose you know exactly who you are and how you want to be perceived, but due to the physical traits that you were born with, you are told that you need to act, live, behave, and present differently. Sounds tough, no? Indeed. Cedric wondered where the bandit was going with such an example. Ridley clarified his point, having noticed the coyote's puzzled expression. It's what I had to go through during the first 20 years of my life, living a lie to keep everyone that mattered to me happy. I desperately need to break free from that lie, but I knew that it meant losing my family, as well as a place that I could call home. I did it. The few words that I spoke had the power to alter my existence permanently. I lost everything. My only option to survive was turning to banditry. Cedric felt the bear shiver as he recalled the traumatic experience. He tried to choose his words carefully, still a little unsure about what the bandit meant. That's certainly a lot to deal with. I'm rather privileged not to have had to suffer through that situation myself. And the cruelty that you must have to put up with from them, simply for loving another man, is outrageous. The coyote felt his companion let out a melancholy chuckle. I didn't tell them that I loved another man. I told them that I was a man. I was born a woman. Ridley sighed loudly. Fight for your happiness, Cedric. No matter what, it's worth it in the long run. I promise. The coyote was stunned. He hadn't even considered this to be the case. He'd hardly ever heard talk of such people, and the little information that he had gathered had often been laced with fear-mongering and religious overtones. What amazed him most was the fact that he couldn't even picture Ridley any other way. This was who he was, the true self that he had to fight for his whole life. Before he could stop himself, Cedric had locked the bear in a warm, tight hug. He let go after what must have been a few seconds, not wanting to overdo it. He'd only known the bandit for a couple of hours, for heaven's sake, but he wanted the bear to understand one thing. He found him incredibly strong. You're 10 times the man that I am, Ridley. Ridley kept silent but replied with an honest smile, following it with a mock outburst to bring the conversation to a close. Now off with you. Get back to the fiendish friend of yours before he starts to wonder which one of us could have kidnapped you. Cedric laughed as he got up from the log he'd been resting on. All right, we'll talk again soon. I look forward to spending more time with you. Selwyn and Blake. As he made his way across the camp, Cedric noticed a portly figure dressed in blue sitting alone near one of the tents. They almost seemed to blend in with the tranquil night sky in the distance. Recognizing Selwyn, he wandered over, wondering if perhaps the cat needed help with anything. He seemed to be making a mental list of sorts, mumbling to himself as he scribbled on a small leather-bound notebook. The coyote waited for the right moment before speaking up, inadvertently catching the bandit by surprise. Do you need any assistance, Selwyn? Cedric, I didn't hear you approaching. Selwyn sprang from where he had been sitting in surprise. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. Drat, he'd already managed to put his foot in it. It's quite all right. Anything makes me jump when I'm concentrating, to be perfectly honest. I can leave if you'd rather be alone. No, please stay. I appreciate the company, and I am rather curious to get to know you. Even though you make it sound like I'm the interesting one here, when I am most certainly not. Nonsense. Scribbling some mysterious notes isn't something boring people tend to do. An honest smile of excitement spread across the cat's face as he opened the notebook on the page he'd been filling in. Ah, these are sketches that I jot down whenever I have some time on my hands. Cedric was surprised. He was expecting written notes, yet now noticed the page was filled with small and charming drawings, a few side portraits, some general lines and body shapes, and a couple of curious objects that he couldn't quite identify. You're very talented. They're nothing much. I'm sure your art is leagues ahead of these. The coyote snickered at this unexpected remarks. I wouldn't give V's ramblings about my old art the time of day if I were you. I see I'm not the only person deprecating their own work for once. Which is precisely why we should cease doing so this instant. The cat nodded in agreement as he slowly sat down again, Cedric following suit as he made himself comfortable close by. What do you enjoy sketching most, Cedric? The coyote pondered before giving an honest answer. I've always been fascinated by people's faces. My uncle used to say staring at a man's face was equal to staring into his soul, and I believe that there was some truth to that. That is an interesting thought. I most enjoy creating fantastical weapons. When I want to relax, I sit down, pull out my sketchbook, and let my thoughts run wild. He showed Cedric what looked like a mix between a cannon, a catapult, and a cart. I call this one the Viceroy's Arm. The coyote hesitated for a moment, trying to parse the meaning of this name, but finally failing to grasp it. Why such a name? Because it sounded cool. They both laughed. Oh, Selwyn, you're such a goofball. When did you first start drawing? Ever since I was little. As all the other kids played, I spent my days dirtying up the papers that I could get my hands on. I used to dream of a career in the arts. The cat's face grew solemn as he recalled past events. But that wasn't to be. I followed my parents' wishes and began work as an accountant. Not the sort of trade for you, I suppose? Well, on a surface level, you'd think that it suited me just fine, but I hated every minute. One day, I heard rumors of a bandit group setting up camp outside my hometown, and I had a mad idea. Well, you know the rest. He shrugged as Cedric gently laid a hand on his back. That mad idea of yours worked out well in the end, wouldn't you say? Someone locked eyes with the coyote for a brief moment. As will yours, I have no doubt whatsoever. Oh, blast this pen. The nibs finally left me. He threw the feathered pen that he'd been holding on the damp grass, picking himself up in the process. Then, without saying a word, he began to walk away, only coming to a halt after a good few seconds. I'm sorry. I'm so used to sketching alone that I almost forgot that you were here with me. I'm going to ask Blake if he has another. Care to come with me? Sure. Cedric was rather intimidated by the Doberman, but Selwyn seemed completely at ease about interacting with him, which reassured the coyote. The two quickly made their way to Blake's tent, Cedric struggling to keep up with the house cat's unexpectedly rapid pace. Excuse me, Blake, would you happen to have another pen? A gruff voice answered from inside the tent. What's wrong with the one that I gave you? I'm sorry, I managed to break it. Fuck's sake, Selwyn. The Doberman emerged from within, wearing his usual serious look. It wasn't his fault, the nib just snapped. Blake turned towards Cedric instantly, as he hadn't noticed the coyote's presence. I'll snap his neck if he keeps happening, I will. This is going to be the third pen that I lend this week. I'm not a paper merchant. I'll be careful, I promise. A devilish grin spread across Blake's muzzle. If you break this one too, I get to decide an appropriate punishment. Deal? The cat rolled his eyes. He, for one, didn't seem fazed by the Doberman's attitude. Deal. As long as it's not push-ups again. Now please excuse me. I think that I'll go and sketch by the stream. Cedric was about to follow Selwyn when he felt a tug at his sleeve. Oi, rich kid. Wait a minute. He began to feel uneasy. What on earth could Blake want from him? Get in here and sit down. Cedric did what he was told, not without some hesitation. Calm down. If I wanted to eat you, I'd kill you first, wouldn't I? He clapped his hands together, crossing his fingers. A word of advice. A bandit's life is tough, hard, and unrewarding work most of the time. We put our lives on the line daily, most often for naught. He unbuttoned his uniform and started taking off his boots as he made himself comfortable. You've had the privilege of getting a choice. Make sure that it's worthwhile. And you're not an idiot, so don't disappoint me. Most importantly, don't disappoint him. Him? Victor, you daft dog. He trusts you deeply. I can see it in his eyes. Cedric nodded as he quietly answered. I won't. I've made my choice. The Doberman gave a snort of approval. Good, because I never got one. I was a bandit from day one, born into it. Cedric's eyes widened in surprise. Aye, my father was a farmer until one day everyone in his village lost their homes. Some rich bastard decided that he wanted to build a huge garden for his mansion, and the town was simply in his way. My father enlisted in the army, penniless as he was, and went over to Prussia to fight for the king. He came back just as penniless and turned to banditry soon after. He was a good man and deserved none of what he went through. The coyote was rather puzzled as to why Blake had begun sharing his life story then and there. The Doberman really didn't seem like the type to do such a thing. He inquired cautiously. Why are you telling me this? It saves time. What? You told us your life story earlier. It was just a matter of time before we all had to do so as well. I thought that I'd get it over and done with now. Cedric couldn't help but smile at Blake's no-nonsense attitude. Does the uniform you're wearing belong to your father, then? Aye, he wore this thing during his army days. It was the only time in his life that he felt accepted amongst his comrades. And now, it's all that I have left to remember him. Blake straightened up, snapping out of his thoughts. Now go find Vic and let him know how much he means to you. Cedric began to get up, but froze as the meaning of those words hit him. God, even Blake had assumed the two were a couple. We're not. Sure you're not. Off with you, rich kid. Half an hour later, a makeshift tent had finally been set up for Cedric and Victor. As the coyote picked up the sack holding his clothes and walked in his direction, he marveled at how spacious the others had managed to make the interior. He sat himself down on the soft and warm blanket that had been laid on the ground. As he looked up again, he noticed the familiar shape of Victor's heading his way. My, these are some fancy sleeping quarters, my dear. I'm really impressed. They certainly don't hold back on making sure that their guests are comfortable. They're all true gentlemen at heart. Victor paused, contemplating. Well, most of them. The fox slowly sat down beside him. How are you feeling now? I'm holding up well. It's been a very long day, but I'm not sleepy just yet. I might keep myself awake for a little while longer. That's good to hear, because I have a few important subjects that I need to discuss with you. Oh? The fox laughed nervously as he scratched the back of his head. Don't worry, it's nothing dramatic. It's just, I spoke to Dion about our current situation earlier, and... Victor seemed to hesitate. We think that you should join the masquerade. Cedric's ears perked up at this unexpected statement. But Let me explain. I'm still one of them even though we haven't crossed paths in over a year. This wouldn't mean that you'd be forced to stay with them forever, but becoming a member of the gang would help you gain the experience that you need to become a skilled highwayman. And this is only if you want to, of course. You're absolutely free to say no. Take some time to think about this, even a few days if you need to. The coyote didn't speak for at least half an hour, completely wrapped up in thoughts as he witnessed visions of a possible future life pass before him. So this appeared to be yet another tough decision that he was going to have to make since reconnecting with the fox. Victor waited patiently, knowing this wasn't something easy for his friend to decide. He picked up the small flask in his pocket and was about to have a sip when Cedric suddenly answered. All right, I'll join the group. Are you absolutely sure? Cedric grinned and nodded firmly. This was the right thing to do. I can feel it. And I've learned to trust my instincts. Victor held his friend's hands as he gazed into his eyes with the sweetest smile on his face. You impress me more and more each day, Cedric. The coyote was too flustered to think of a half-decent reply and simply kept on grinning. There was just something about Victor that made him feel special. Anytime the fox complimented him, it was as if Cedric had been set ablaze with newfound energy and confidence. It wasn't just any old feeling, this was different, something he'd never felt before. Could it be? Yes, this was it, he thought. He was falling in love with this fox. However, there's one more detail that you should be well aware of. You don't just become a member of the masquerade by doing nothing. You will have to pass our very own initiation test, much like I had 2 years ago. Cedric felt a wave of anxiety hit him as he pictured everything going wrong at the mere thought of a test. For many years growing up, he hadn't had to worry about these, having received a private education under the supervision of a grumpy old badger, Mr. Farley. Though Farley was a strict teacher, he'd never subjected Cedric to any particular demanding tests. However, when the coyote was 15, he joined a group of other children from noble families at his parents' behest, supervised by a new teacher. The tests that he had to take from that moment onward were much more demanding, and the punishments that followed unsatisfying results harsher than any he'd experienced previously. Since then, he'd never been able to shake off that feeling of dread that preceded being judged. I hope I'll be able to. Victor patted him on the back. Come, come. Judging by what I've witnessed over the last few days, there's no reason why you shouldn't manage it. The coyote gave a faint smile, still not completely at ease after this latest revelation. It's made up of a few separate trials to test your various skills. Are you still sure that you want to go through with this? Cedric took a deep breath before replying. There was a chance that he might mess this all up and look like a complete fool. On the other hand, he had nothing whatsoever to lose. Yes, I am. Victor pulled his friend upwards and gave him an affectionate hug. After letting go and taking a few steps outside the tent, he spoke loudly, demanding the group's attention. Cedric has already decided to join us. We might have a future 7th member on our hands. He proudly glanced at his friend. Which means that you'll be facing the first trial now. The other bandits appeared a couple of seconds later, having heard Victor's announcement. Dion, Blake, and Ridley were the first to walk up to the two. The hyena cleared his throat and raised a hand to his mouth, waiting until everyone was completely silent before speaking. And that's where I'm going to leave it for today. So, we finally met the new characters. We met Victor's old friends, his old bandit troop, Dion the hyena, Hollis the tiger, Ridley the sun bear, Selwyn the house cat, and Blake the Doberman. They seem like nice people despite the fact that they're bandits. I'm pretty sure they all have their own little, reasons to become bandits. Or to, I suppose, to remain bandits. It kind of seems like it's a found family type of situation, where these are people from all walks of life, but they all have something that sort of helps connect them in a way. That brings them together in a way also. It isn't just the love of, robbing people. It's, certain little things here and there. Certain little obvious things. Yeah. What else? I am interested to see if there is anything up between Dion and Victor, because it kind of seems like there's something that they're not talking about. And I certainly hope that it doesn't end up being a sort of situation where it's like, oh yeah, we're all friends, yeah, they're all nice and whatever, but turns out that they need you to do something bad. And you're gonna take the fall for it. He. Because you're the new guy, and they don't know you. So, oh well. Yeah, I kind of feel like that's where it might end up going. It's gonna be one of those stories where it's like, oh yeah, good friends, but they turn out to be bad, or they turn out to not have your best interest at heart because you're new and they don't really care about you. But yeah. Also, Lysander. We know that he's the bad guy. We know that he's the one that's going to mess everything up for Victor and Cedric. But I also kind of feel that, at least in his situation, it's not entirely his fault that he is thinking this way, he's behaving this way, because all his life he's been raised to think that because he's rich, because he supposedly comes from nobility, from like the Middle Ages, And, well, yeah, basically his upbringing, that whatever he thinks is right, and if you go against him, then you're obviously wrong and stupid. And in this case, not only did Cedric sort of like tell him like, hey, or well, he didn't tell him. He kind of insinuated something that made him think about what's going on, where Lysandra basically went like, wait a minute, do I have feelings for this little twerp? Oh my god. Not only that, but this little twerp just left. So he's having one of those moments, but because he's the bad guy, he's reaching the wrong conclusions instead of the correct ones, which is, maybe I should, have a little bit of time to myself and think about what I am doing and what I caused in order to have my friend, decide to basically leave. Instead, it's like, no, it's this other guy, this bandit dude. He stole him, and I want him back. He doesn't view Cedric as a person who can make up his own mind. And that probably comes with, being, the rich, spoiled brat that was never told no, probably. I mean, he was probably told no, but it was probably for something, stupid. It wasn't told like, no, no, Lysander, you can't do this to people, or you can't, treat people this way. No, it's like, you know what I mean. But yeah, it was good and interesting to be able to see this about this character, because usually you don't get that much backstory for the villains of the story. You're only ever told that they're bad because they're doing bad things, or because they want to wish bad things to the protagonist. But yeah, it's not a justification, but still. Anywho, so, write down in the comments what you think, and thank you all for watching / listening. If you would like to play A Fall from Grace, or stay up to date with it, or whatever, I will be posting down the Twitter links down in the description, which should have direct links to the itch.io page where you can download it yourself and play it, or you can just go to itch.io and, download it from there. Just, search it out there. And I will also be posting down a link for their Patreon. I see the little P right there. So that you can support the project if you feel so inclined. It really helps these types of things, because you're basically showing them like, hey, I really like your project. Here is some money. I want to support it going forward, and etc. etc. Also, coffee down in the description in case you feel so inclined to donate to me and, help me get a new chair. Also, channel memberships. If you haven't noticed that by now, or if you're new or whatever, you should see the thingy on the bottom left below this video that says join. And there will be a video there that explains more or less what happens. You also see the badges there, and then the little emoji thingamajiggers. I think I can add more now, since I have more people. And also, you should probably be seeing right now, if I'm smart enough that I already did it, the people who are the current channel members who already subscribed and who are already supporting me. On the left, you'll see the Yin supporters. And on the right, you'll see the Yeet friends who get early access to these videos, which would have otherwise been scheduled. So now all the scheduled videos are over there for the channel members of the second tier. They get to see them before everyone else. There will also be, eventually, more videos for only channel members, and those are videos that only they will see forever. No one in the public will ever see them. I think there's only one video right now. Eventually I'll add more. I already have an idea for one, having to do with, oh, this is how I record, this is how I edit, this is my equipment, etc. Hopefully people are interested in that. But yeah, so yeah, there's that, in case you feel so inclined to also support me through channel memberships. It does help the channel. Anywho, so I guess that's it for now, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.